Awesome. Well, thank you so much to everybody for joining tonight. We've done these environment and climate change speaker spotlights for a few months now. And tonight was the one that we've had the most people ever register for. So thank you to everybody for taking time out of their evening to join us. So my name is Ali Greenslade. I'm the Climate Engagement Coordinator and Policy Analyst here at the Métis Nation of Alberta. And if you don't know, the Environment and Climate Change Speaker Spotlight invites community, Métis community members and industry professionals to share their skills and knowledge. And the goal of the initiative is to provide a sense of community and just a space to talk about the environment and climate change and climate action and the overall protection of the environment. The choice of topic for each session is based on community feedback and citizen. We love sending out surveys and we listen and try to provide programs and services based on that. So I'll maybe just invite, I have a couple of colleagues helping me out tonight. So I'll maybe just invite Courtney and then Annalena to quickly say hi and introduce yourself.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Courtney Anderson. I'm an environment project coordinator with the MNA. I work on a lot of our monitoring projects. If you've got any questions throughout, feel free to fire me a message. I'm just here to help out wherever I can.
Thanks, Courtney. Annalena?
Hi, my name is Annalena, and I am an engagement assistant for the Environment Department. I pretty much just help out wherever I can in the department in general, so I will be doing the same today for Ali and Natalie.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Annalena. Moving along here. Can we see that? I hope. So just a quick overview of how the session is going to go. We have a prayer provided by Elder Norma Spicer, which we'll share. And I'm going to do a quick little department update from the Environment and Climate Change team here at the MNA. And then I'll pass it over to Natalie, and then we'll have time at the end for some questions. So since we do have a fairly good group tonight, I'll just ask if people have questions throughout the presentation to put them in the chat. Our team will be keeping track of all of them. And then if something's answered in the session, later on, we'll kind of get rid of that question and then have a list of questions for the very end, just knowing that things might be covered and that we don't have a ton of time tonight. All right, we are now going to open the session with this prayer from Elder Norma Spicer. It's really great. She's made custom tailored prayers for each one of our events so far. So I'm very happy to be able to share this with you all.
Please join me in prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Heavenly Father, we are grateful to the Métis Nation and their environment and climate change staff for providing us information and resources that teach us ways to prepare for natural disasters and food shortages. We are grateful that these speaker series strive to increase preparedness among our people so that we can be better equipped to deal with catastrophic events. Dear Lord, we are grateful for the skill, gift, and discipline of those among our Métis communities who follow in the footsteps of our ancestors to protect and sustain the bounty of the land you have left in our keeping. We are grateful to our harvesters and gatherers that provide the substance to feed our people. Help us this day to trust in the deep wisdom and traditional knowledge that you have gifted them. We are thankful for the programs that connect us with one another to learn about hunting and foraging for traditional foods and medicines. In our hearts, we know, dear Lord, that many people, when truly contemplating the things that could happen in crisis, wrestle with anxiety, doubt, and fear. True security and peace of mind come from trusting in you and preparing our families for times of emergency. Deepen our understanding of how to live together, to share resources, to put our skills to work together, and most of all, to build on our common desire to live holistic ways as all of your people. We place our trust in you now and forever. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost.
Thank you again to Elder Norman for sharing that with us tonight. And while I have the floor for a second here, I'm just going to do a quick update on some of the projects our team is working on. You may have seen we just finished up a round of community engagements on our ski project. The ski project is our effort to work on environmental monitoring, conservation, and community kind of engagement work. We currently have programs where we do bird, berry, and fish health monitoring. And we're asking citizens for feedback on those projects and where we can improve and just general environmental and climate concerns. So the community engagement sessions are done, the in-person ones, but we do have a survey that you can fill out online and share information that way. I'll maybe just ask Annalena if you could share the link to that survey in the chat, and I'll send it afterwards in an email as well. And speaking of surveys and online forums, we also have an emergency preparedness program right now where we have purchased a number of emergency preparedness kits, and we have a Google form open to apply for one of those kits. We are prioritizing giving the kit, since we have a limited amount, to folks who might be more vulnerable in the event of an emergency, but that application is open right now until the end of the month. So Annalena, if you don't mind sharing that as well in the chat, that would be great. And then last thing, and I promise I'll hand it over to Natalie. I just wanted to highlight, if anybody hasn't heard, we have a pretty cool thing going on at Métis Crossing. We're building a 4.86 megawatt solar farm just north of Métis Crossing. And if you're not super well versed in megawatts or energy in that way, that's about the equivalent of offsetting electricity of about 1,200 homes, or taking like 100 cars off the road. So it's pretty substantial, and it's really cool collaboration between the M&A, the town of Smoky Lake, and Smoky Lake County. And the project's goal is to reduce emissions, generate economic and community benefits, and it's the largest wholly owned Métis solar project in Alberta. So it's under construction right now, and there's a target energization date of this summer. There's something to be aware of. Yeah, that's everything for me. Please reach out to anyone on our team here today if you have any questions about any projects. You're also welcome to just send questions in the chat generally, or to one of us in particular. I urge you all to, if you're not already, follow us on all social channels, or sign up for our bi-weekly newsletter. There's lots of good information shared, and links to events and so forth. But that's enough for me. I know you all came here to hear from Natalie, so thank you again for all being here today. It's awesome to see so many people sign up and want to talk about this topic. I'm really excited to hear what Natalie has to say. So with that, I will stop sharing and pass it over to you, Natalie. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. All right, can everybody see my slides now? Okay, technology changeovers are tricky. So I just want to make sure that, whoops, everybody can see me okay. And here we go. So first of all, I want to say thank you for the invitation to come and share. This is actually one of the topics I feel most passionately about in my life and in my day-to-day activities. And so I'm really excited to be able to share on this. When I received an email from Courtney saying, well, what do you think about sharing on the topic of food security? I was like, yes, absolutely. I want to do that, as this is something I share on regularly. And you'll understand understand a little bit more about why it makes me so happy to share on this topic as we go through the presentation. But first, I just wanted to say hello, Tanse, Tanshi, bonjour, and introduce myself a little bit, as I know I recognize many of the names in our gathering today, but there's tons that I don't. So I want to start out with introducing myself and saying Tanse, Natotemtek, Nwagamaгаnak, Kakisimo Isqueo, Nitsigasen, Maka Natalie Pepin, Dishnikashin, Nimiriten, and Nikishkatan. I'm really happy to meet you all. Winnipeg, Oshchinia, Maga Tawatinao, Miwiken Equa, Otpimshak Isqueo Nia, Hubien Fem Metchif Nia, Cuthbert Grant, Pay Pierre, Pay Mary Falcon, Pay Janvier Richet, Pay Marguerite L'Espérance, Pay Solomon Hamlin, and so many others. Mi parenti Kayash Oshchinia. Hello, everybody. I shared with you my name in Cree, which is actually what you see on Zoom, and it's very confusing to so many people. And my name in English is Natalie Pepin, and so you're welcome to call me that. I'm originally from Winnipeg. However, I now live in northern Alberta in the Tawatana Valley, and Tawatana, or Tawatinau, it means valley in Neheyuan or Cree. And so that's where I currently live. And that's about an hour and a half north of Edmonton. And I am a Métis woman. And so I shared a lot of my introduction in Northern Michif and some in Southern Michif. I like to honor all of the languages of my family, which includes Cree, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe-Moin, French, and Southern Michif, not much English until the most recent generations. And I also shared with you the names of some of my ancestors, who include Cuthbert Grant as a great uncle, and his sister Marie Grant is one of my family's matriarchs, great grandmother, and her husband Pierre Falcon. And these are two names that I feel so proud of. and if you're familiar with the history of our nation, you'll know why. I also shared the name of Janvier Richet, who was one of the gentlemen who stood with Louis Riel when they stepped on the surveyor's chain. And in fact, it was Janvier who took the first step and stepped on the surveyor's chain. The more I've learned about his life, the more I realize he was a very bold man, and I appreciate that about him. And then Marguerite L'Espérance, my grandmother's great grandmother, who is one of the last daughters of the fur trade in my family. Everything after that was quite stationary and agricultural. And Solomon Hamlin and so many other names. Oh gosh, we could just go on forever on that one. So I'll stop there. And I currently, my role in the community is to share our culture, our traditional skills, our arts, our language. And I do that in a variety of ways. And you can see some of those ways. There's like little logos at the bottom of this slide. And so I run a company called Reskilled Life, where I share traditional skills. And this is open to everybody. And it's general traditional skills. And then I also run an organization called Meeting My Ancestors, which is actually a program within Reskilled Life, where I share Métis culture with Métis people who are reclaiming culture, who are learning about their roots and about our traditions. And then the last one is in Achagapeganak, or spirit markers, or Cree syllabics. And that word Wasakam, it is it's a very important project to me, which is all around Indigenous food sovereignty, but I'll talk more about that later. I used to teach business in Calgary, and I feel like I've lived a lifetime or two in terms of my career. However, my background was I have a degree from Harvard University with a focus on international relations and the environment and business. And so all over the place, but mostly I focused on resource-based economies and living in a good way on the land. And so when I left Harvard, I decided that I would farm, and it was not the career path that many people in my classes were expecting to take, but what I had learned was that for us to really live in a good way on the land, we had to be closer to the land. And for me, that meant moving off grid and beginning to homestead and living a life that my ancestors would recognize. And so that's what I've been doing for the past 6 years up here in northern Alberta, and just adoring it, honestly. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm sure we could share so much more, but you know what, our nation's history is so much more interesting, and I like to start with the beginning. And for our nation, you know, our ethnogenesis, that beginning of our nation's story, is an incredible period that I love learning about and sharing about. And within the culture that we developed and expressed on the plains as buffalo hunters, fishers, and farmers, trappers, and traders, are all the skills we need to express and experience food sovereignty in our lives. And so I have this slide though, because I want to point out we weren't just buffalo hunters. That's like the core. And it's so important to our worldview and ethic. But we also had fishing communities and trapping communities and farming communities. And, you know, I introduced some of my ancestors, the Grants and the Falcons. They had cattle and pigs and chickens and crops and went buffalo hunting. And so, you know, our expression of our indigeneity, but more importantly, food sovereignty, includes both of those sides. And I like to start out that way because, you know, it's not one or the other for us, it's both. And our culture, and most Indigenous cultures, are cultures of food security, meaning that the entire culture is centered on family, freedom, and food. And that's still kind of the case for Métis families. You know, we're very, very close with each other. And although we have long legacies of disruption in our families and a lot of really hard circumstances, that notion of family and the importance of it is really central. And then, of course, freedom, because we all know we're a little bit, well, we've been called rebellious, but we are freedom loving people. And a lot of the clashes around our freedom over history have come with our relationship with the land and our foods. We have a worldview in the Métis Nation, as with most other Indigenous nations, that views ourselves as being in relationship with everything around us. And the term for that in Michif is called Wakutuin. And in Neheowen or Cree, it's Wakotuin. And that means the relationship between all things that we participate in, and not just between humans, there's a different word for that, but in all things, all of our relations. So the grass, the water, the birds, the buffalo, all of the animals, all those things unseen, that we're in relationship with all of them. And it's that cultural foundation that our nation was birthed into. We organized around food. So I mentioned our epic buffalo hunts, and I'm so fond of telling stories of those. Often it was Cuthbert Grant and Pierre Falcon and Pierre Falcon Jr. or all the juniors thereafter, up until the cessation of our buffalo hunts. You know, that I had many families leading those hunts from within my own lineage. And so I love talking about those buffalo hunts. But we also, as I said, organized around fishing. We have large fishing communities in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. Fishing was critical to our survival and our food sovereignty. And of course, farming, whether that was pasturing animals like our horses, cattle, whatever animals we might have been raising for food, and also crops, but also hunting. And I would say, you know, hunting is just one of those cornerstone skills that we are so disconnected from today, and that we're really having to actively share with our population so that we can keep that important connection to the land alive. It was one of those cornerstones for us. And of course, wild harvesting. And this includes things like medicines, teas, berries were a very important one. Our sugaring, our wild sugaring. So that's maple syrup, birch syrup. making maple sugar. And then we also have wild harvesting in terms of grains and vegetables. So we had a relationship with wild rice, with lee nouveau, or Indian breadroot, which was one of our main starches, or a lot of people call them wild turnips. And so we have all of these ways that we would actually organize our entire year around these activities. So it's not just that these were a part of life and everybody went off to work or did all these other things. Our world centered on these activities because it was our survival. Now, we also experienced the colonization of our foods. And this started from the very beginning with limits on buffalo hunting near our communities in Manitoba and beyond. And this was actually the very start of our clashes with the Hudson's Bay Company originally, and then Canada itself, in limiting where we could hunt, when we could hunt, how much we could trade of what we hunted. And then, of course, that led to our first battle with settlers in the region and the Hudson's Bay Company, which is, of course, another epic story that I love sharing, but I have very limited time today, so I'll skip over that. But that we would call the Victory of Frog Plain, or the Battle of Seven Oaks, if you are on the opposite side of that story. Now, in terms of colonization, we also had incredible hardship from our communities being moved around. There were several Métis communities that were simply disassembled on the communities themselves, where we had settlements and that land was needed or taken for other purposes, where the community was simply literally disassembled, sometimes burned. And of course, when you live so close with the land and your annual cycles are based on the food sources from around that region, moving communities is catastrophic because you don't necessarily know the land in the exact same way as you would have close to home. And then we have prohibitions on traditional hunting and fishing. We had hunting parties. We hunted as community several times a year. And then we also hunted as family groupings throughout the rest of the year. And we've experienced as a nation prohibition on those hunting practices. And then, of course, as you know, we get into the more environmental side, we have had absolute destruction of habitats and species that we rely on for food. So all of this is a part of our experience of colonization of our foods. And these colonization tactics are not unique to the Métis experience. These are actually common with most colonized societies. Now, we also have colonization beyond our own unique perspective, but perspectives that we share with other nations around us. Of you know, when the reserve system started, although that did affect some Métis people, not as many people were affected by that, but that reciprocal relationship that we engaged with our kin, with those nations we're so closely related to, were severed, where many Métis families were not even allowed to share food if they had family on reserve. You couldn't share food with those people. There are the starvation experiments in Indian hospitals and institutions across the plains where Indigenous children who were in the care of those facilities would be starved to see how little they could get by with and not die. And these were well-documented experiments performed on Indigenous people in our great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents' lifetimes. Of course, there's residential schools where so much of the experience there was atrocious, but also including completely inadequate food being fed to children, rotten food, food that could not be used or sold in any other space, and nutritionally void foods that most children who attended those facilities were not accustomed to eating and had a very hard time living off of. We also have the experience of farming schools, and you know that sounds kind of good, right? I'm going to teach you how to farm in the European way. Now, we already had a lot of those skills and we already practiced a lot of those skills. However, our farming traditions wasn't simply European. It was also from our Indigenous kinship systems. A lot of our families have Anishinaabemowin or Ojibwe origins. I know in my family, many of my great grandmothers came from the Ojibwe Nation, and then many from Cree nations, and so we have farming knowledge and stewardship skills from both of those sides. However, these farming schools were not as altruistic as perhaps it seems. Most of those schools was actually training Métis people to be farm laborers, not farmers. And most of those farming schools were closed as they were horribly ineffective, and huge failures. And then, of course, in a more modern way, we have the complete denial of harvesting rights for most Métis people outside of Manitoba. Now, there is a process whereby through many provinces, Métis people can apply for their harvesting rights. However, these rights are inherent in being an Indigenous person, and many Métis people are denied that right. And then finally, with the doom and gloom part, food security has been something that I've talked about, learned about, and has been a big focus in my life for a long time. And one of the things I consistently see is Indigenous people, all Indigenous people, experience at least double the rate of food insecurity as non-Indigenous Canadians. So the average rate for non-Indigenous Canadians is 9%. This does change from year to year, but it varies between like 9 to 13% usually. And then, of course, the rate of food insecurity for First Nations and Métis and Inuit people is 33 to 54% of the population that experiences food insecurity. So that's our families. And I am going to start out with a discussion of my family's experience of food insecurity. But I also just want to talk about what's going on in the world today, because food prices are shooting up. There are shortages worldwide. Even grain production has been decreasing by sometimes 40% as an average reduction for crops like wheat in Alberta. We have incredible drought throughout so much of the world, including the area where I live. Now, where I live, our experience of drought isn't as severe as other places, but we have been experiencing drought. And over the last few years, we experienced these barriers to food security in a very acute way, meaning they were made very obvious to us during the pandemic, where food was not necessarily even available on shelves the entire time. And of course, in some communities, that's worse than others. The question that I want to start out, that's the looking back portion. The presentation we have today was entitled Looking Back and Looking Forward. And so that was our looking back portion, that we have a culture based in food security and food sovereignty, that our culture was centered around that, our annual cycles centered around that. But that, of course, there was this experience of colonization that our families have lived through and are still living through. And that includes a lot of food insecurity. And so now, looking forward, the most important question is, what is food security for your family? What does that even mean? What does it look like? And I'm going to share a little bit of my family story for this. So for us to, reach any destination, if I want to drive to Manitoba, I have to know where the heck I'm starting to begin with, and B, know where it is I want to get to. So the first step is always, where am I right now? And about, longer ago than that, about 20 years ago, I was a new mother. And my family's story is that very few of us ever went to post-secondary education. I'm the first in my family to get a degree and to go to university. And so I had the expectations, kind of online with the rest of my family, that maybe I'd work in the trades, or which is a wonderful area to go into, but I just didn't really have a lot to provide for my family with at that point. I had no education. And I was working in the trades. I was doing an electrical apprenticeship and I adored it. I loved working in the trades. I love building things. And so I was working for a home builder and I injured myself at work. I fell from a ladder and what happened was I impacted my knees and I had what they call a deep bone contusion, which is like a bruise inside your bone. And I wasn't able to walk for 6 months. And I had to go for intense physiotherapy. And during that time, I was on WCB, so a form of insurance for employment. And it was not enough to actually cover our daily needs. And we were faced with the decision where we could buy food or pay the rent. And this isn't an uncommon experience for people, especially nowadays as these things become so expensive. And what I realized in that moment was that as a parent, I had a responsibility to provide for my children, and I had found myself in a situation where I could not. And it was a horrible feeling, and I detested it. And what it really spurred in me was the desire to never be in that situation again, where I had no food. I had no ability to buy food. I had no skills to grow food or, go preserve it or go get it, or just feeding my family meant going to the food bank at that point in time. And I had no knowledge of how to grow food and no equipment with which to do it or to store it. But I was deeply motivated to ensure that my family did not have this experience again. We had that experience growing up. Not, it wasn't uncommon, for there to be stress in the family about the ability to buy food for 5 children. And so I very much wanted to change this situation. And where I am today, this end result is I have 1 to 2 years of food on hand at all times. I know how to grow food. I grow most of my food in most years. I know how to preserve food. I raise animals. I have the skills to do it all over again. And in fact, last year, just about a year ago, it was a year, the second week of April, I think, my home burned down and all of my food stores went up in flames with the house and everything I owned. So I was back down to zero, had no food, and that was my priority when the house burned down. I was right back to that same point where I was at one point in time decades ago, where I didn't have what I needed to feed my family even. And so that was, again, my first priority. The difference between 20 years ago and last year was I had the skills to do it and was quickly able to prioritize what I needed to do so that my family would always eat. So one of the things about, where we start and where we want to get to, which for me is where I am at currently, is that there are barriers along the way. And we discussed some of those barriers. Colonization was some of those barriers, but we also talked about some of those modern barriers of drought, of food shortages, of lack of availability, breakdown of supply chains, all these things we've experienced over the past few years, which your families have experienced too. I don't want to make this some sort of theoretical discussion that is removed from our daily experience. Your families experienced those same conditions and still do. You are part of the food system that I am also a part of. And it's important that we recognize that there's a very human, real face to those barriers. And that within the Métis Nation, approximately, and within all Indigenous nations, there's approximately 30% of our population, of our families, who don't have food security, meaning they don't necessarily know where the money to buy the next grocery trip or the next grocery bill is going to come from, or that they have inadequate food, meaning they can't afford healthy food. So it's a very real issue, and we have barriers from point A to point B. There's this saying that I love, and it's that the problem is the solution. And it's the most confusing saying. And I think that's probably why I'm just like, enamored with it because it's complicated. Life is complicated. But what this saying means is that our barriers, the problem itself, shows us where we need to give focus. So if I don't have food, that's a problem. And it shows me that in order to build a better life, to have good life on the land, I need to remedy that. That's where I need to focus. And I can develop resilience in that area. So if we do the flip side of a barrier, it's an opportunity for building on our food security. So I had the opportunity to bring home the relationships, the resources, the information, skills, materials, all that knowledge needed to feed my family. And, you know, it's easy to say, oh, well, I just don't have those things, and to throw up our hands. But when we break it down into a system of improving upon our current situation, it makes it much more doable. And so I developed a system for building food security, and it's called the PRISM system. And what that means is that for all these different areas around food security or food insecurity, that we have these 5 basic opportunities to improve that situation through people or relationships with people, with resources such as financial resources, programs in the community. We can improve upon our food situation through information, building skills like gardening or canning, butchering, and then of course materials, the equipment that we need. So for me, if I was to want to improve upon my family's food security in the area of protein and meats, then I might want to learn to pressure can. And if I wanted to do that, then I'd need not only the information, I'd have to practice the skills. It can be a little nerve-wracking using a pressure canner. I was afraid of them for a long time, although I am not anymore. But I would also need the materials. I need the actual canner. I need the jars. I need the lids. I need the funnels and all the things that we use in order to practice that food sovereignty skill. And so I just wanted to give a really quick example of how this might work. And I'm just going to check the time constantly here. So when I first started farming, because I kind of skipped part of my story, I was teaching business in Calgary at one point at a nonprofit to people who live on a low income. And that was around that time when I graduated from Harvard and really wanted to just get out of the city and onto the land. And so I started a farming, and I ran Alberta's largest CSA farm at that time. And when I got there, when I started this adventure, I didn't really know how to grow carrots. I had tried a few times, and they were horrible, stubby, fat little round things. They weren't the right breed for that. Like, they were supposed to be long carrots. And I was just really bad at growing carrots. I didn't know how to do it properly. And one of my goals when I first started farming is I want to grow like the best carrots, because I really like them and my kids love them. And so for me, going through this process of building on my food security skills, I had to develop relationships with people. I had to learn from people. And so in this case, it's learning from people on YouTube, learning in books. How far apart do I plant those? I needed that information. How deep do I plant those? How much water do they need? And actually, that's the number one reason that people have a hard time growing carrots, is they dry out. I needed resources, so money to buy carrot seeds. Carrot seeds aren't actually cheap, kind of like onion seeds. They're remarkably expensive. And then also the skills of recognizing things like what's a weed seedling and what's a carrot seedling. I remember when I first started farming, we'd have volunteers come and help us in the gardens, and I'd be sitting weeding with them, and they were pulling out my damn carrot seedlings. Like, stop what you're doing. But what I recognized is I had actually built the skill of identifying a carrot seedling versus a weed seedling very quickly. So I could just weed really quickly and not pull out my carrot seedlings. Whereas that's a skill. You have to actually learn that. And this person helping me had not yet learned that. And how to dig up your carrots without breaking them in half so they store nicely for the winter. But I also needed materials. I needed garden hose, strap hose, which is my favorite thing for growing carrots. I needed a rake, seeds, tarp, sprinklers or watering cans, digging forks. There was just a lot. But, when you say, I just want to learn how to grow carrots really well, that's kind of a goal that is it doesn't lead you down any path towards that. The way we start walking towards that goal is through all of these things, the relationships, resources, information, skills, and materials. And when we divide it all up into those different categories of, well, what do I need in order to meet this goal? Those categories make it doable. It makes it actionable. So when we're talking about food security and all these different means of building food security, I want you to keep this in mind. Well, what would I need? Who would I need to ask? What resources would I need? What information do I need to find? Do I need specific equipment? These are all important focuses. Now, the next few slides I want to share is different ways of viewing food security, and I've ordered them in an order that I would share with just the general public as to what is most important to work on first. And within our culture, we have these traditions that we've inherited from both sides of our lineage. And on one side, we have the long story, and it's our origin story. And a part of that talks about this period in time where humans didn't always survive very well, and we've had these cataclysms. And one of the things that has allowed humans to get through that, those periods, and some very specific periods, was having access to food that was stored. And this is a skill that the importance of food storage never diminishes. We think because we're modern people and there are grocery stores all around us that there is this illusion of food security. What most people don't know is that in normal shopping conditions, so people are just going about their lives as per usual, most grocery stores have 3 days supply for the people who are their patrons. And BC experienced this 2 years ago when there were fires and floods and the highways were cut off, and those communities ran out of food earlier than 3 days, because in an emergency, people begin to buy what they need. And it's not hoarding. In an emergency, if your family is facing not having food in a couple of days, it's not hoarding to want them to have food, but it is irresponsible to not have already had that food accessible to you. And I don't say that in a judgmental way. I know sometimes it just sounds matter of fact, but our culture was built on an understanding that we needed to have food for the winter. We needed to have food for the upcoming season. And our activities were built around that understanding. It was just a basic understanding. And many of us have that understanding anymore because we have the illusion of convenience and security through grocery stores. Now, food storage, it might be having 72 hours of food. Believe it or not, there are people who don't have 72 hours worth of regular food stores in their home because they don't have the financial means to have that. So that might be a goal, to develop 72-hour kits for food. And these are usually, staples, non-perishable items that can keep somebody alive through an emergency. Then there's short-term food storage. So this is a 3-week to a 3-month supply of staples, foods that keep you alive. And you could also look at this as maybe that's your regular grocery shopping trip. For my family, we live rurally. We live in northern Alberta. It's an hour and a half to Edmonton, where the food is reasonably priced. Up here, it's just not even reasonably priced. So we don't buy food up here. We buy it when we go to the city. And because of that, I only make one shopping trip a month for certain things that I don't have access to right now, like milk or cream or butter, although we used to have access to those things and are working towards that again. So that might be your regular shopping trip, or it might be something that you need to work up to. Now, the first goal that I set for my family when we found ourselves in that really food insecure state, I was a single mom and I was working full time, and it was month to month, and we weren't even really able to meet those monthly demands on our finances. So my goal was to have a 3-month supply of staples, of things like rice, beans, flour, basic ingredients that I had to learn to use at that point. I was not very good at baking bread back then. I can bake bread now. I can't eat it now for health reasons, but I can make it. And so I had to learn that skill to use those basic staples. And then the third layer of that is working towards a long-term, what I call survival supply of food. So that's whether it's a 3 to 12 month supply or a 1 to 2 year supply, which is where I'm at for most staples now. And this is, some people are like, well, that's excessive, isn't it? And most of those people haven't been off work for 6 months, not having an income to buy groceries. And so could it be excessive if you've never had those types of hardships? Maybe. But most of our nation's families have had those types of hardships. And it is not excessive to have enough food to get your family through an emergency. Those short-term emergency supplies are more like natural disaster food supplies, whereas a long-term, that's usually a personal emergency, like a loss of a breadwinner in the family. If your partner dies and that income that they were bringing in is not available to your family, having a year's worth of food is an incredible source of security. And for me, it was injury, and I was the major breadwinner for my family at that point. And so having a food supply is incredible. Now, sometimes your house burns down and then you don't have that anyways, but I have it again now, and it is wonderful for me to know that no matter what, I can feed my family. I can keep them healthy and alive. Now, another layer of food security is food production. So this is when we talk about gardening, raising livestock, foraging, or gleaning. Gleaning means, when somebody else has a zucchini plant and they're done picking zucchini and they don't want any more, it's you picking those zucchini for them and eating them. And that's the case, if people have apple trees that they're either not going to harvest from, or they've already harvested what they need, it's picking those apples. So that's what gleaning means. And this is really common in urban spaces where people have maybe community gardens, personal gardens, fruit producing trees, but also sometimes for farmers. Sometimes, I know from experience that when I would pick peas for our CSA members, I didn't get them all. It's impossible to get them all, but there was always enough left over that would probably feed a family for their entire supply of peas for the year. So gleaning is an opportunity to develop relationships where you can just go pick that food that they grew. And usually it just goes back into the soil anyways as compost, or it's rot or fed to pigs or whatever. So all of those are also opportunities to build food security. Now, we also have food preservation skills as an incredible source of food security. This includes canning, dehydrating, freezing, fermenting, root cellaring, storing pantry items. And it's really interesting to me, when we take stock of what we have to start with, a lot of people don't necessarily recognize that 30% of all food that North Americans purchase, that includes us, is wasted. And if we knew how to store that food better, it perhaps could be food for our family, resulting in a 30% decrease in what we need to purchase for our family. That's massive. If you could take 30% off your grocery bill, you'd be like, yeah, I'll do that. And what that requires is skills, knowledge. And these are some of those skills and knowledge that are needed to help our families not only reduce those costs, but also to replace those items that we're relying from outside our homes. So when I learned to can, I love canned meat. Let me tell you, canned stew is amazing. Canned meat is just one of my favorite things. I don't mind drying meat and smoking it. It's good too. It's a lovely snack. Freezing, it's fine too. I don't mind cooking it fresh, but canned meat is so good. And so that was one of my favorite skills to develop. However, another one that I thought was just incredible was when I learned our traditional indigenous food storage techniques of storing food in moss. And I had tried saving carrots from the garden so that I'd have enough for the year. And it was so hard unless you can or freeze or dry them. and I wanted fresh, crunchy, sweet carrots. And I learned that you can, in fact, do that. And I have for many years by storing them in moss. And that's something our ancestors did, was storing those fresh veggies in moss in a cool space. Now there's two more sources of or focuses or lenses for food security. And this one is food sheds. So, in environmental sense, we talk about watersheds, which is the way water moves across the landscape and sinks in. So waters the plants and is available for animals and for ourselves. And a food shed is the way food moves through spaces. So it's those things that we eat that nourish our bodies, and they tend to move around a little bit. So not everybody grows their food, preserves it on site, and then eats it on site. We also have farmers, retailers, producers, other families, people who process food, sell food, community organizations where there are community gardens or that bring in bulk food orders from other places. These are all opportunities to build our food security. There are some things I can't produce here that I like. I really like tea. I like it a lot. I drink tea multiple times a day, and there are teas that I can harvest here, and I do. There's a lot of herbal teas that I pick around where I live, but I like black tea, and I can't do that here. I can get close with natural teas, but I need a source to purchase tea from, and that's a part of my food shed relationships, is having places where I can obtain that. And then the last that I want to bring us back to is that our culture was a culture of food security, of food sovereignty. Food security means knowing where your food will come from for a period of time and having access to that. Food sovereignty means I can reproduce that on an ongoing basis, year to year, generation to generation. Our nation is one that had food sovereignty. And it's a hard reality that we do not have food sovereignty right now. Our nation on a whole does not. Individual families might, but as a nation, we don't. And in order to express sovereignty within our nation, to be sovereign nations, we need food sovereignty. And so these are the skills that on this landscape, on this land where our families are from, these are important skills that allow us to reclaim our culture. Hunting and fishing skills are critical for us to have on this landscape. Learning our traditional food skills. What foods can you eat on the landscape, and what should you absolutely avoid? That knowledge was basic within our families. Our children had that knowledge. So reclaiming that is important. Knowing how to cut up an animal. I learned to butcher over the last decade, to the point where last month I was able to harvest and process a buffalo by myself for my family's food. So now I have enough red meat for my family for at least 8 months, maybe longer. I don't think it'll last longer, but 8 months. And I was able to do that. I was able to afford that because I harvested the buffalo, I cut the meat, I wrapped it. And that made it so affordable for my family to do that. Being able to process those meats, going and picking berries, drying them, canning them, freezing them, whatever that is, knowing how to make syrup. It's not hard, it takes a while, but it's a skill that we have access to on this landscape, and it's critical. Again, no nation is sovereign without food sovereignty. It's a hard reality. We all, as Indigenous nations, talk about that we have sovereignty, that we are sovereign nations. And my retort to that is always, oh, yeah? So why is a third of our nation going without adequate food then? If we're sovereign people, we have to have food sovereignty. So this is not only, an environmental imperative of shortening the food supply line and decreasing emissions and improving climate outcomes and upon those goals. It's also for Indigenous rights. If we want to be able to claim our sovereign rights, we need to express our sovereign responsibilities. And one of those is food sovereignty. Now, one of the ways that this is such an important topic for me, one that means so much in my daily life, that we began offering these wasikam Wasakam camps out on the land where I live, about half an hour south of Athabasca, where we learn and reclaim our Indigenous food skills and cultures. And so in these camps, we learn about Indigenous systems of agriculture, not the European style. Those aren't, I don't feel those are bad, but it's important that we also recognize our Indigenous systems, that we restore all the food knowledge that we've lost, that we reclaim our relationships between food and ceremony, that we rebuild our relationship with the land. So what we do is I'll go back to that one, across 4 seasons. So once every season, 4 times a year, for 4 days for each camp, I invite people to come out to where I live, and I share some of these food sovereignty skills. So last year we learned to can jam and berries. We learned to pressure can meats. We learned to dehydrate. We picked wild berries, teas. We picked cattails in every season as food, learned how to process those. We butchered meats. We learned to grow fruit-bearing bushes and trees. We learned to plant vegetables. And all of these skills are being shared within an Indigenous worldview. So we're talking not just about the technical act of food sovereignty, we're learning about the spiritual connection to our food, the cultural connection to our foods. And we're doing this in a semi-traditional style. I call it ceremony light because it's, if you go to ceremony, there's a very specific way things are done, and we kind of do things that way. So they're 4 days long, these camps. Often we have a pipe ceremony, most seasons we do. And then at the end, we have a giveaway where we then, one of those aspects of that PRISM planning system was the materials, the things you need in order to build that food sovereignty in your family's life. So we give those things away at the end. So people received seeds, they received blueberry bushes, they received onion sets, they received trees, fruit-bearing trees, they received equipment, food processing equipment. All of these things were given away at the end because our culture is also based on sharing, not just sharing skills and information, but physically sharing food and the things that we have. So our next camp, we are butchering a buffalo, and it's a huge task, and I'm really excited to share that process with a community. It took me 2 weeks to butcher a buffalo myself, on and off. I was sick for part of that time, so I couldn't. But as a community, I know that it will only take a few days to fully butcher a buffalo. And so we're going to be sharing that. We're going to talk about safe meat handling, packaging meats, harvesting. We're going to begin to work on the hides and the bones for tools, all of these ancestral skills that are so important. So Wasakam is about creating spaces where Indigenous people and all treaty people, so it's not a closed camp, meaning the entire community is welcome to show up, to learn these skills about how we live on the land in a good way in order to bring back, to reclaim food sovereignty for our nations. So I'm going to just turn off the slides here, and then there's just a few more things that I wanted to share, but I'll let you see my face here. Or maybe you always could. I couldn't see my face. So let's see, what time are we at? Good timing, Natalie. All right. So I just want to take a few more minutes on sharing before I turn it over to questions. And I want to go back to that PRISM planning process, where for each of these different lenses or areas of food sovereignty, whether it's I want to produce food, so what skills do I need? What people do I need to build relationships with? What knowledge, what resources do I need? That would be the process I would go through. So when I have something new that I want to learn, a skill that I want to build, that's what I do. I look at, okay, who do I need to ask questions to? So this might be an elder. It might be one of our Kiteayah, which is the Cree word for elder. we need to turn to them, because you know what? Your grandparents had a lot of these skills, and if they're still around, they're the best source for that information because they love you and they want you to come and ask them how to can jam and spend time with you. So, those would be some of the relationships, or maybe there's relationships within our communities or nations. There's a lot of focus on food security right now, and that's not, chance. There's a lot of focus on food security right now because there's a lot of food insecurity right now, and food prices are rising and they are not going back down in the foreseeable future. And this is a global thing. It's not just us. It's not because we live in the north. It's going up everywhere. It just goes up in the north at a greater rate than everywhere else. So that process of learning about how do I build my food security, okay, it's through all these different lenses, and within each of these I can learn who the people are that I need, the resources that I need, the information that I need, the skills and the materials. And that I termed PRISM because we remember acronyms and so much better when we have something like that. So that little pneumatic device. Now, with all of these things that I've shared, it's an overview of how you go about setting, deciding where you want to focus, breaking that down into actionable spaces. But I have so many resources. So I teach about food security. It's part of my career. And so I have developed resources for people to use in building their food security. And I'm sharing all of those resources with you. You can download them to your computers. Now, some of them will be a little confusing for you to use. I have this spreadsheet that I developed that will tell you, okay, so if you have a family of 5, how much food do you need for the year for a family of 5 to survive on? And that's based on recommendations from Canada Food Guide, which I'm not the biggest fan of, but it is based on, those recommended nutrient, fat, protein, carbohydrate recommendations from those guides. And then you can customize that to your own family's diet. We don't eat much for carbohydrates at all in our family. And so I have to customize that. And so there is all of my resources in there for you, including this calculator. And if you want to learn how to use that calculator, that's another story. So I can share that. And I have a YouTube video where I do share how to use that calculator, where to put information in such that it spits out the numbers for you of how many pounds of meat do you need for a year for your size family? How many pounds of vegetables do you need? How many pounds of fats, oils, cooking oils, butter, lard, cream, all of that do you need in order to survive for a year or 3 months, whatever the time period is? So all of that is being given to you for free. There are tons of PDFs. There are canning guides, butchering guides, gardening resources, companion planting. When do you plant each thing in Northern Alberta? How many plants per foot in a garden can you put in? All of these are in a folder for you on my Google Drive, and you can download them at will. So that link is being shared in the comments here. And also there's follow-up coming from the MNA where they will also share that link with you in case, sometimes we don't grab it before the session ends and oh, it's gone. I do that all the time. So if that's the case, there will be a follow-up email that you can access with all of that information too. And I hope that some of these resources will help you a little bit in building food sovereignty for your family. There's tons of information there, but remember, information was one part of what you need. You also need people around you who are committed to this. You need all of those other things. So break it down into a goal for your family. So if, for example, I always recommend that people start with food storage because it's the easiest to start with. Instead of spending $10 at Tim Hortons on coffee over the next week and a half, use that $10 to buy a big bag of rice, the biggest bag you can afford on your next grocery shopping trip. And, maybe you don't eat rice, whatever it is that you do eat, extra bags of pasta or whatever, and just slowly build up that food supply. And it's fine for it to be foods that you already eat, that your family already makes use of, that are shelf stable, and just begin to have access to those foods without having to go to the grocery store in an emergency situation. The government of Alberta has tons of resources also. Those aren't among the resources that I've shared, as I feel their resources are inadequate. However, they also have resources for emergency preparedness and planning. And so you can access those also. Now, the last thing I want to say is come to our camp. If you are in Alberta, I don't care where you're from, actually. There are people from Saskatchewan who come, British Columbia. You are all welcome to come to our camp where I share these skills in detail and you go through the skills. So we're hands-on butchering a buffalo, learning about safe knife handling, how to sharpen a knife, how to package meat. And it's free. It's free for everybody. Children are welcome. Now, the winter camp is the hardest camp because it's winter and it's cold, but you are welcome to come for any portion thereof and bring your family to experience those food sovereignty skills. And you can also get a hold of me. The Wasakam page is on Facebook. And so if you're on Facebook, I encourage you connect with that page and you can connect with me there. And yeah, there's so much within our community to share for skills and knowledge. And I really recommend that you reach out and start your family on that journey. When I did, I was a single mom on WCB. And it was hard. It was so hard. But knowing now what I know, it would have been so much easier to go through that process. And so if you need to reach out and have people walk along that road with you, that's what we're here for. Our goal is to build food sovereignty for Indigenous people and to lower that rate of food insecurity to at least on par with everybody else, and hopefully so much lower. I mean, this is our homeland. We know how to live here. We always have known how to live here. We need to begin to express that again. So I want to say thank you for being here with me. I'm so thrilled at the turnout that we have. And it would be so lovely to engage with you even more. And I want to say thank you again to the MNA for inviting me to come and share a little bit about food sovereignty. And we have lots more, so many wonderful opportunities coming up this year to learn about our plants and our relationship with those edible and medicinal plants and growing gardens. So I really encourage you to come out to all of these events to join us for those. And with that, I open it up to questions.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Maybe I'll just jump in for a second if people are thinking of questions. I just have to say I've worked at the M&A for I think 9 months now, and I've heard so many wonderful things about you, and it was just so magical to be here tonight and have you share, and I learned so much. And yeah, it's so awesome to hear your passion and share all your knowledge and take time to do this and all the resources you provided. And I was just messaging with my colleagues on the side saying we have to come to your camp and we'd love to do that. So maybe just speaking of the camps, because I saw a few mentions in the chat, how many times a year do you do those?
We do them every season. So our winter camp usually happens in March because March is the more tolerable of the winter months. And it's also when we're starting to think about our gardens and what we're going to do when the weather warms up. So it's always in March around the full moon. And so this year, that's March 9th to 12th. That we're going to be hosting it. So it's a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, every time we host a camp. The second one is in April, and it comes up real fast, our spring camp, because we need to get ready for our gardening. And so in April, so winter is talking about butchering and meat processing. And April is talking about gardening, prepping our gardens, having our seeds ready, having the knowledge and all the equipment and everything we're going to need to manage our gardens for this year. Summer is foraging for food. So in the summer, we go out into the valley where I live and we go harvest cattails and we go harvest berries, we pick teas, we learn about drying fish. All of those summertime food skills, that's what we practice in those. And that's usually July or August. This year it will be August. And then our fall camp is September or October. We don't have the date announced for the fall camp yet. However, all of the other camps dates are set and they are on our Facebook page, that Wasakam Facebook page. has the flyer with all the dates on it, details of what we're doing in our winter camp coming up. And camping is open to anybody if you are brave for the winter. In the summer, we have a lot more people camping. In the winter, we do have some people who camp, but most people get a hotel in Athabasca, or they just drive back and forth to the camp from wherever they live. And you don't have to join us for the full 4 days. I mean, you're welcome to come for one day and glean what you can for information and skills. It's not done workshop style. It's done camp style, meaning all the meals are prepared by people at the camp. It's not catered. We all cook together and we cook traditional foods. We don't eat Asian rice. We eat North American wild rice. We eat buffalo and wonderful meats, and we try to keep everything as authentic to our cultures as possible. So again, kids are welcome. The only thing we don't allow is dogs. And that's just because we're processing food. We can't have everybody's dogs around. And so, yeah, everybody is welcome to come. There are a lot more details on the Wasakam Facebook page for people if they want to gather more information.
Fantastic. Thank you. I saw one question in the chat asking if there's a cost, and I think you mentioned that it is free. You do this all for...
Yeah, so we do accept donations. My family pays for the entire cost of this camp. And so it's really helpful to have help with that. I mean, even just purchasing the buffalo is very expensive, but we also invite elders and we give them protocol. And you know, we gift our elders so that they'll join us and share their incredibly valuable teachings. But then there's the giveaway, because I purchase, everybody who shows up gets a gift. And so there's so many ways to contribute, but it is free, so that money should not be a barrier to attendance, period. And those who can do contribute, whether that's in helping bring the food that we'll all share, donating to the giveaway, donating financially to some of the costs, helping with the labor to set up. It takes me a week to 2 weeks to set up for each camp. So people contribute in so many different ways, but it is free. There is no cost.
Wow, that's incredible. A couple more questions in the chat. Somebody asked about if we could potentially share your slides. I'll send a follow-up email and include all the links. I'll find the link to the camp and include that. And would it be possible to share the slides as well, Natalie?
Yeah, absolutely. I can send that to you in an email.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, any other questions at the moment? People can just like unmute and jump in, or there's a raise hand feature on Zoom as well.
Hi, can you hear me? Natalie, I just wanted to say that's amazing what you're doing. Thank you very much for that.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much.
I'm
for
from,
joining us.
I'm from northern Saskatchewan, so yeah, I know what you're saying about, you know, it's hasn't been easy for everyone. So, I mean, opening the door for this relationship with our community, I mean, I think that's just amazing. That's all I wanted to say. And thank you to the MNA for putting this on.
Hi. Thank you for your comments, Jackie. That's so kind.
Any other questions while we have Natalie for another 16 minutes?
Yeah, I was just wondering, like if somebody was starting from zero, what do you think would be the best way for them to begin their journey to food security?
What I often recommend, so a couple of years ago, I did something called the 60-day food security challenge. And it was a program that I offered to people. They paid to access it. And that's a lot of the resources that you're getting is from that program. And what I told them is, I gave a list of the staples that are recommended that you have as a food supply for your family. And it was, if you could only have $20, every grocery trip to spend, here is the order of priority in terms of survival for your family of food supply. And so you get the list, and it tells you, if you only have $20 a month, or I think it was $25, here's the order that you would purchase things in terms of importance to human survival. So that would be, in terms of increasing your access to food and food storage. But the most important skill in food security is knowing how to cook with real ingredients. And that doesn't cost anything. In fact, it's cheaper than buying convenience food. So, if you have somebody in your community who knows how to bake bread, it's bringing them something nice and saying, please teach me how to bake bread. I really need to learn this. You know what? It tastes fantastic. There is effort involved in food security, period. There is. I mean, there's effort involved in anything. If you're going to go to work to make money to buy groceries, there's effort in that too. But that effort of learning to bake bread, make pasta making is so easy. It is so easy to make pasta. It just takes time. All of these old school food security skills are actually free to learn. 99% of them you could learn from YouTube if you had nobody to turn to. And so that, along with having your staples for an emergency food supply, building that up on a monthly basis, you don't have to go out and spend $1,000. You can just add $20 to your food budget. And that might be, in the program that I teach, I even go so far as to say, where are you going to find that $20? What are you going to not get for the next little while? Whether it's Tim Hortons coffee, because coffee at home is cheaper. Or if it's, I'm going to sell some stuff I don't need that's sitting around my house, and that will make me $20. And then I will buy a bag of rice with that $20. And that bag of rice, $20 of rice, when you buy bulk, lasts like 6 months. It's a significant amount of rice. $20 worth of bulk pasta, that's a lot of pasta. So that's how you go about doing something like that, is figure out how to increase your food budget by even $20 per grocery shopping trip, and invest that in staple foods that you will also learn how to cook with. That combination, if you do that month after month after month, learning one new thing that you could cook with those staple foods that you're investing in that month, you will be well on your way to food security. Just do that every shopping trip. Find $20 to invest. If it's selling something you don't wear anymore on Facebook Marketplace, if it is babysitting for somebody for an hour that month, if, whatever that is, create a plan to find $20 or to stop buying convenience food. You don't need chips to survive. I love chips. I can't eat them anymore, but I love chips. I wouldn't have to buy the chips though. And I could invest that money in a better place on my grocery bill, even if it meant my kids being pissed off for a little while. That would be totally fine. So that would be my recommendation. If you are at 0.0, find a way to invest $20 per shopping trip on staple foods that are being purchased in bulk, and then learn to use those foods. Learn how to use a bag of flour really well. Learn all the different cooking skills that will allow you to cook from scratch. And that is incredible food sovereignty right there. That's a great question. Thank you. Any other questions? I really love talking. I don't know if you've noticed.
There is a question that just came up in the chat. Do you have any suggestions about growing food in the city if you have a small backyard and some windows?
Yeah, so that's how I started. I only moved out of the city 6 years ago and started farming. So I lived in, Winnipeg, then Lethbridge, then Calgary, then Edmonton. And so I only ever had a backyard. But what I did do is I maximized the space that I had for growing food. And I grew food that mattered the most. So what does that mean? It means, what does your family eat the most of? What are they most willing to eat? you should have those foods, except for junk foods. I mean, that doesn't count at all. What vegetables and fruits and meats are they willing to eat? That's how your space should be prioritized. But it also could mean, what is the most expensive thing to purchase? So we know tomatoes and peppers are ridiculously expensive. Cucumbers are so expensive. All of those things you can grow in your backyard. It would take skills, knowledge, maybe, a sheet of plastic to cover them with when it's frost outside, but all of those are doable things to learn. But it also might mean prioritizing space. If you buy greens, let me tell you, greens are so easy to grow on a constant basis. You can just keep planting them and they'll just keep growing. And some of them, it's called cut and come again, where you plant them once and you just cut them and they'll grow up again. In 2 weeks, you'll have more of them. Then you cut them for your next salad and you grow more. And if you had a little window box of that, you could have all your salad all season long that way. So prioritizing the best use of your space is a really good thing to think about right now. Now is when we plan gardens. It seems like it's so early, but let me tell you, spring's coming fast. And you should really have, if you're going to grow food this year, you should buy your seeds right now, especially if you want really good seed suppliers. They start selling out about now. So now is a really good time to start thinking about, well, what will I grow? And how will I grow it? Do I have space in the ground to grow food? Do I need to buy some planter boxes? Can I build some planter boxes from reclaimed lumber? All of those are things to think about right now. And I don't know that it's been announced, but we're going to do a lot of growing stuff this year together. So join us for all that too, where we go through the entire process of growing food and caring for garden spaces and all the different ways that that could be done. So yeah.
Fantastic. Just so we try to stick on schedule, and you've done a fantastic job so far. Your presentation was exactly the right amount of time. But we'll maybe just, there's 2 more questions in the chat. So then maybe we'll just end after those. So one is, do you have a recommended seed seller?
I have a bunch. I am a fan of seed companies that sell heirloom seeds, open pollinated seeds, and that have good ethics with their seed practices. And not everybody shares this. If you go to Canadian Tire and you just get your seeds there, I'm not going to judge you for that. However, one of my favorites is West Coast, in that they're Canadian. They have great resources on their website. They have great species that they sell. And I've used a lot of the seeds that they sell there, and they grow well. They're a really reputable, good quality seed supplier that's in Canada. And I currently buy a lot of heirloom seeds, meaning I buy old school seeds. So the corn I'm growing, this is a corn that was grown in Manitoba 400 years ago. I love that. Like, that just makes me so happy. So there are seed suppliers that are much more specialty oriented. And if you were wanting to start looking into heritage heirloom species, there are rare seed catalogs. Actually, this might be a good one for me to actually give you my list, because I have them in a document. I have the whole list of my favorite seed suppliers to give to people. So why don't I'll put that in the folder that you guys have, the Google Drive folder. I'll copy that document over there. And then I'll also, when I give my slides to be distributed, you guys are welcome to share those seed suppliers also.
Perfect. And Kay, we'll just do this one last question. Nicole asked, do indoor gardens follow the same seasons as outdoor, or can you grow things inside at any time?
It depends. So some things you can grow indoors at any time, and greens specifically. You do need special lights though. Plants, our winters, our sun angle is just super non-conducive to growing food. So the good thing is grow lights are really easy. There are LED grow lights that you can get even at Canadian Tire on sale often. That's where I got my grow lights. You don't have to have the specialty food production grow lights, they're usually twice as expensive, but they might have the same number of lumens and light spectrum as the ones you can get at Canadian Tire for at least half the price. So you do need lights to grow indoors, and the seasons are not identical. And a lot of people do a combination thereof, where they'll start their things indoors and then move them outside when the season is ready. Microgreens you can do that any time of the year. They're so nutritious, and you put them on salad or in whatever else, and they're so nutrient packed and so easy to do. So for indoor growing, if you're just wanting to get started, microgreens are a great way to get started, whether that's sprouts or just using indoor grow mats to actually sprout the vegetable seed beyond the sprout stage. So to where it has grown its cotyledons and the next leaf stage. So that's a microgreen, whereas a sprout is pre-cotyledon. It's, it'll put out its main sprout and then it'll turn into leaves. And those first leaves are called cotyledons. And before that cotyledon stage, or right at the cotyledon stage, there is so much nutrition in a sprout. And so they're a great thing to start with. And then after that cotyledon stage, we call them microgreens, where they're still incredibly nutritious. They don't take up very much space, and they can be grown year round. Indoor growing is a whole different ballgame, though. There's different equipment needed, different skills, but it's completely doable for everybody. Could grow something indoors if they wanted to.
Fantastic. I would love to be able to stay and chat all night. Thank you so much for being here. I just wanted to mention a couple more things while I have you all here. So just to reiterate, I will send a follow-up email to everybody who is registered for the session tonight with a link to the recording of this video and all the resources we chatted about. Also the 2 links we shared at the beginning. One which is our ski survey, if you want to share anything about environmental concerns, and also the other link, which was to our emergency preparedness kit. So similar to kind of some of the things Natalie shared about food security, also this 72-hour emergency preparedness kit would have all the kind of necessities for a family of 6 for 3 days. So I'd encourage everybody to apply for that. And lastly, also, we have a survey about this event. So, I think it went great, but I'm a little bit biased. But we always love to hear from everybody who attended. So if Annalena, if you could send that in the chat, perfect. She just said, I'll send that in the follow-up email as well. But if anybody who attended today could fill that out, that's really great information for us. Just questions about, how the session went, what we can do better, any ideas for future topics. Maybe you want to have Natalie come back again. Also, if you fill it out and you're an M&A citizen, you can win a $100 Visa gift card. And think of all the rice you could buy with that. Yeah, that's it for me. I'll just thank you again, everybody who came tonight. It was a fantastic conversation, and thank you to Natalie for sharing with us.
Hey, bonsoir. Good night, everybody. And kawapa matan mina. I will see you again soon.
Thank
Thank
you,
you
everybody.
so much.
So I'll stop recording.